so much for making time with us on another exciting episode of African Youth Time. Today we're talking Pan-Africanism, and of course we cannot talk Pan-Africanism without talking to one of Africa's finest gentlemen who believe in the development of Africa. Today's show promises to be so exciting and mega, so stay glued to your TV sets. I'm going for a short commercial break, and when I return, I shall introduce my guest. Thank you so much for still watching African Youth Time. My name is Nana Owusu Ansah. My guest today is not new to African Youth Time because he's been with us from the journey so far. And today, as we're talking Pan-Africanism, we have to have one-on-one chat with him. He's the Vice President of Synergies Institute, Ghana, and a public speaker and a Pan-Africanist as well. His name is Ogochukwu. Did I get it right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. This is a question I have always wanted to ask you. By virtue of the fact that we are Africans, do you think everybody's a Pan-Africanist? Or do you think because we are all Africans, everybody's a Pan-Africanist? Then, who then is a Pan-Africanist? And what is Pan-Africanism?
Wow. First, thank you very much for having me on your show again. And warmest greetings to your cherished viewers. Now, when we speak of Pan-Africanism and whether every African is a Pan-Africanist, it brings us to first trying to understand what Pan-Africanism should represent. You know, now a lot of people think that it just has to do with, you know, the coming together of Africans to be quote unquote united. Okay, but unity is not achievable if the consciousness is not the same. Okay. And this is my school of thought. This is what I feel, and as far as I see it, I believe that Pan-Africanism is a consciousness. Okay. It's a consciousness, and it actually started from somewhere. Because of the experiences that we've had as Africans, because of the things that we've had to go through, you know, it brings us to a point where we need to have a consciousness that is African in orientation, African in perspective, African in standard, before we can even begin to think about unifying ourselves. One of the biggest challenges that we have is the fact that we've not been able to truly define who an Africa is and what an African should represent. Am I an African merely because I'm dark and I bear an African name? Is that what makes me an African? Do I have that consciousness that is necessary to take Africa to a certain level? The reason I speak about the consciousness is because of our history, where we are coming from. Okay, we have the pre-colonial African society, the colonial African society, and the post-colonial African society. The pre-colonial African society is almost disappearing because we are not taught in school. When you talk about our fashion, our relationships, our business, everything we are doing to a very large extent is devoid of our history and the information that we should have. But when we have that consciousness, it will reflect in our education, it will reflect in how we do business, it will reflect even in our governance, but it is disappearing, and understandably so, because remember that we went through that slavery period, and after the slavery period, a bunch of people went to Berlin, you know, in the 1880s, sat together and divided Africa like a piece of cloth. When they finished dividing Africa like a piece of cloth, that was the genesis of colonialism. Okay. And when colonialism started, the first thing they did was disintegrate the systems of Africa, whether it's in terms of education, governance, and every other thing that Africa stood for. Everything was disintegrated, and the Western way of life brought into our systems. Now, that is one of the reasons most of the times you find out that Africans are unable to solve their problems, even when they have the best intentions. Why? Because the information that is necessary as a solution to that problem is non-existent or has not been found. And so when we speak of Pan-Africanism, for me, it is a rediscovery project. It is a project that is going to bring the African to come back to who he or she truly is. When that consciousness comes, then we can work together. One of the reasons Pan-Africanism is not achieving what it is meant to achieve. I mean, it's not enough to just dress like an African. Yeah, sure. It's not enough to speak an African language.
Sure. Or bear an African name.
Or bear an African name. Yeah. Okay, there are other things that are really important that will bring about the self-worth, which is going to help the confidence and the mindset of the African. All these things will have to factor into what we ultimately call Pan-Africanism.
Wow. And this consciousness, is it something which is supposed to be inborn or learnt in society or taught in school? Must I be taught to be a Pan-Africanist, or must I bear that? How do I conceive that mind that I'm an African and I'm a Pan-Africanist?
You've asked a very, very important question, and somehow in my heart I was hoping that a question like this would come up. And I'll give you a small background. There was a book, it's actually a true story, written by a man called Alexander Haley Jr., called Roots. Now, Roots was Alexander Haley telling a story about his genealogy, if you put it that way, starting from a young man called Kunta Kinte in Guinea, and how Kunta Kinte was taken away as a slave, to the United States. Now, when they got to the United States, Kunta Kinte's aim was to escape and go back to his country, enjoy his freedom as a freeborn, as a man that has been born free and cannot be subdued by any other person. Now, one of the things they started to do to Kunta Kinte, first they cut off one of his legs, so that he doesn't run anymore, and then they changed his name, and they beat him so much till he accepted that his name is Toby and not Kunta Kinte. What were they doing? It was indoctrination through punishment, bringing him to a point where he walks away from his past, from his history, from who he is, and accept an identity that would disconnect him from his past, that would disconnect him from his history, that would disconnect him from his ancestors. This is the bane of the African. So, are we born? Is it something that is in us? The question is, what information are we imbibing? Al Gore made a statement a long time ago. He said that the quality of information we imbibe today will be the basis for leadership tomorrow. And this is what we are going through as a people. The fact that we are receiving information that disconnects us from who we are, information that disconnects us from our ancestors and gives us a new image, a new identity, something that we are craving for, but as we crave the more for it, it disconnects us the more from our experience as a people. So look at the definitions. I'll give you 3 people, okay? So we have a man called David in the Bible, okay? Then we have a man called Alexander the Great. Then we have a man called Shaka Zulu. Now, David killed so many people in the scriptures, okay? He shed so much blood, but from a distance, he's holy. He's a man after God's own heart. And that is the impression we have about him. Alexander the Great was so bloodthirsty that all he thought about was war. And somebody once made a comment and said that when Alexander the Great viewed the vast expanse of his empire, he wept because there was no other war to conquer. Now you have Shaka Zulu, but he is called a bloodthirsty barbarian. 3 people that have done the same thing, but have been defined differently. And the African has accepted that David is a holy man. Alexander the Great is the kind of man that you want to even name your children after. Shaka Zulu is a barbarian. See? So we are being indoctrinated, and it's affecting us because this is what we're learning in school. Okay? Now, Hollywood, for instance, was used to push an agenda that gave the African the impression that he was second class, and the white man the impression that he was superior. As a matter of fact, there was research that was done, and they came out to say that the brain of the African is substandard to the brain of the white man. And they pushed the agenda. Tarzan, that movie originally was used to establish to the young American and British that they were superior to the African. And it's all pushing, and we're all accepting it. Do you see how we celebrate white people? Because it's in our heads. Okay, so these are the things we learn in school. These are the things we learn in quote and unquote church. These are the things we learn, in the mosques. We receive this information, and what we don't realize is that it is disconnecting us the more. A simple question: if a Muslim that is an African answers Kweku or Ogo or Nana, will he still not be a Muslim?
Yeah, he will still be a Muslim.
Why do you have to answer Abu Bakr and Musa and Muhammad? Those are names that are consistent with people from the Middle East, the Arabs. So we take up those names, and what's happening to your own name? Yeah. You have pastors that will tell you that your local name is evil, is dedicated to a god, okay? But it's okay for you to answer Sunday. That is the day of the sun. You see the mentality.
Yeah, sure.
You have people that will tell you that celebrating Christmas is okay. Christmas is the feast of the sun god. It's common knowledge. In Germany, he's called Krakus. In the Mediterranean, he's called Baal. Okay, but it's okay to celebrate it, but you cannot celebrate your New Yam festival. Yeah. See, you're told that when you go to church, you can even take communion with wine that is 1.7% alcohol. Some of the times 7% alcohol. Yeah. So you drink it and you almost get tipsy. You know that there are some people, the smell of alcohol gets them tipsy. Now you have to drink it and get drunk. But they tell you that drinking palm wine is wrong. These are all issues. You come to school. Barney is used to teach our children A, B, C, D. Yeah. Is Barney not a masquerade? What is the difference between Barney and the masquerade from your village? But when you're sleeping and you see Barney, you feel that you're going to be a professor. When you're sleeping and you see your masquerade from your village, you say the demons are after you. Definitions. Yeah. And everything that is going on around us is disconnecting us from who we are. And that is why the African is missing even on the global table, because the African does not know who he is anymore. If I may, I was having a conversation with a few friends just a short while ago, and we're talking about, the great Kwame Nkrumah, who all of us love and all of that. He made a very interesting statement on the day that Ghana, and I'm hoping that this is the last time I have to use that word, Ghana got its independence. I would have been happier to say, the 6th of March, 1957. But he said that the independence of Ghana would be meaningless, unless, the African continent is totally liberated.
Yes.
The question now is, what do you mean the independence of Ghana? Independence from what? It's an indication that we negotiated our freedom. What we're supposed to do was reclaim our sovereignty. A reclamation of our sovereignty, not our independence. Independence from who? From what? Who asked you to come? Did we beg you? Did we tell you we needed your help? So why are we talking about independence? It's a poor definition of where we truly stand and where we are meant to be going. And until the African is defining himself, his realities properly, the concept of Pan-Africanism and the unity of Africa is a joke.
Wow. So, God, do you think it's too late and there's nothing we can do about it?
It's not too late. And that is why I appreciate programs like this and the efforts, that you guys are making to share this information. I'm not even asking for everyone or for people to agree with me, but for them to think critically about it. Are you truly an African? What makes you an African? What do you reflect as an African? What do you stand for as an African? When 5 people sit together and 5 of them are from different nations, you have a Chinese, an American, a British, a Russian, and an African from any part of Africa. They sit together and they're having a conversation. The British man will speak from a British perspective. The American will do the same. The Chinese will do the same. The Russian will do the same. When an African opens his mouth to speak, he will talk like one of them. Because that's our orientation. That's where we're coming from. When are we going to start looking for Africa-specific definitions? There's an African perspective to everything under the sun. When are we going to start looking towards that direction? When are we going to create an education system that is Africa specific, that looks at Africa and then looks at other things around Africa and say, okay, you know what, we can borrow this and borrow this and borrow this and apply it from the African perspective and use it for Africans, so that when we go to tables like the United Nations, we can bring the African perspective to the table. Until then, we'll just keep pushing an agenda.
Wow. I'm speechless right now, and I feel so emotional about the thing, because we all fall prey to what is going on, and one way or the other, our way of dressing, our way of talking, everything, we want to push the white man's agenda, which is really not going well. But I want to find out, do you think the unity of Africa it's realistic. And unity, I wanted us to define what the unity means. Is it unity in terms of economy, unity in terms of governance, unity in terms of education, or how do you want to see the unity of Africa?
Thank you again for that question, because it's very, very important. And that is the reason every time I speak about African unity, I still prefer to call it the Organization of African Unity and not the African Union. The African Union kind of, the meaning kind of disappears when you mention it. But when you speak of the Organization of African Unity, you see a nomenclature, okay, that helps you identify with your kinsman. But that's for me. I mean, nobody has to agree with me, but the very essence of, the Organization of African Unity was for Africans to come together and push a common agenda that will bring about their growth and their advancement, whether it's in the area of economy, education, security, general welfare of the African people. Like Kwame Nkrumah will put it, there are some African nations, that are more endowed, whether in terms of number or wealth or resources, than the others. But we are all supposed to work together and raise ourselves as an indivisible entity. The question now is, with what consciousness are we going to do that? Okay? When you think about the founding fathers of this concept of Pan-Africanism, from Kwame Nkrumah to Julius Nyerere, Jomo Kenyatta, Samora Machel, even Thomas Sankara, we've had people, that pushed the concept, of Pan-Africanism. There are statements that they made, and there were reasons behind the statements that they made. How many of us remember those statements? How many of us even know that those statements were made? When we go for the African Union Summit, are we reminded of those statements? Those statements are sacred. Those statements represented where we are coming from. Those statements represented our history, where things went wrong and how we plan to correct it. Okay? Kwame Nkrumah wrote over 11 books. Do we know those books?
No.
Are they being used in our schools?
No.
Are they being taught in our schools? Can you find them in libraries in Ghana? In how many libraries will you find them? These are fundamental questions. But we have books written by other people. We are learning psychological theories from other countries. We're learning Karl Marx's Das Kapital. What has it got to do with the African? Can the African not develop a theory that will help us go back to understand and remember our governance structure and see how to apply ourselves to it? There are so many things we have lost, so many things we cannot remember. And like I always say to my friends, you cannot use the solution of other people's cultures to solve Africa's challenges, because it's inconsistent with us. It doesn't work for us. We don't understand it. And do you blame people if we don't understand it? You can't blame us, because it's inconsistent with our history. A lot of people say, let us forget about it and just move on. Move on to where? Move on from what? You do not even understand who you are yet. So by what standard do you define yourself? The Americans did something very interesting after the Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump elections. A lot of things happened, and these are things that exposed the Americans in a light that we hadn't seen them before. But one very interesting thing, they called it voter irregularity. They call ours rigging, but they called theirs voter irregularity. One of the things that stood out for me when I heard that statement is that the American is able to define himself and the events that go on around them. Who defines us? Who defines us? And who defines the events that go on around us? So we allow other people to come in and tell us what we should stand for.
Yet we claim to be independent.
How? Think about this very interesting one. Think about this. So there was a time we used to walk around barefoot, and they say it was barbaric, uncivilized. But now they are propounding theories and saying that walking around barefoot from time to time is actually good for your health. Now Africans are adopting it. When an African carries a bowl on his head or on her head and goes 100 meters to a stream to get water, they say the African is suffering because they have to go long distance to find water. But a white man can jog for 5 kilometers to stay healthy. And it's not suffering.
It's not suffering. It's not child labor.
Who is defining us? Who is telling us what we stand for? At what point do I have to know? My sister, think about it. Look at the weather of Ghana. 37 degrees, sometimes 41 degrees in a day. And you tell me that wearing suit is corporate. How can you wear suit under this kind of weather? But we have systems that tell you that if you don't dress like that, you're not properly dressed. What does it mean to be corporate? To be business-like in your outlook? Must you wear a suit to look business-like? No. It's all in our minds. And so we need to reorient ourselves. That is what Pan-Africanism is all about. A reorientation of the African mind so that we become proud of ourselves again, identify with our worth, identify with our history, and the efforts that our founding fathers made to bring us to a point where we can say we are a people. Until we go back to those things, we won't be able to compete favorably with the rest of the world. Okay.
Ogo, we'll be going for a commercial break, but I want to ask you this before we go. So are we trying to say, or conclusively, are we saying that regardless of the good policies that government puts out there, no matter how good they are, no matter how, whatever they are, do you think it's impossible for us to attain that level that we want to go as Africans if we don't reorient ourselves as Africans and then believe in ourselves?
Yes, you see, because those policies might be good, but you look at the implementation and it hits a brick wall. The question is, why does it always hit a brick wall? A policy might be good, on paper, and it makes a lot of sense. But to whom are you applying it? To whom are you implementing it? How consistent is it with their history? Is it something they can embrace? Is it something they can work with? Okay, think about this policy about IT. We keep talking about IT. A lot of people do not realize that one of the downsides of IT is that every time it is introduced, people become redundant.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So you have a certain technology that can do the job of 10 to 20 people.
Yeah, so
you have to lay them off. Nigeria is 196.7 million people. Ghana is 29.5 million people. South Africa is a little over 53 million people. Okay, then you go and introduce an IT policy that tells you, yes, we need to make more profit. We need to be more effective. It is going to bring about that effectiveness that you're talking about. It will even bring about more profit. But what happens to the people at the end of the day? It tells you you're not paying attention to the realities on ground.
So, wow, we are not paying attention to the realities on the ground. We're going for a short break, and when we come back, we're delving into some of the ways that the white men, so to say, want to depopulate Africa by way of our food and introduction of certain diseases. We'll be right back shortly. Welcome from that commercial break. We're still having a conversation with a lawyer, Ogo. I will not mention the rest, yes. And anytime we have him on the show, it's very intense and very interesting. Ogo, before we end the show, I want to find out something. There's this agenda that the government of Ghana is pushing regarding the fact that we want to have a governance or a country beyond aid. Generally, for all Africans, do you think it is feasible to be independent solely without aid?
It is very, very feasible. A lot of other jurisdictions have done it, and it is something that Africa can achieve. But it still boils down to that issue of the consciousness by which we approach things, okay? And how we negotiate our worth. How we negotiate our worth. I'll just give you a very quick instance. So there are about 5 or 6 African countries that produce cocoa. And we're doing very well at that production of cocoa. But when you put all of us together and export the cocoa that we produce, we make about $8 billion from it annually.
Wow.
But when the people we export it to process it and sell, even bring some of them back to us to buy, they make over $80 billion annually. So the question is, why do we keep exporting the cocoa? Why can't we process the cocoa here and make that $80 billion? Wow. It's a question. So if we're thinking about Ghana or Africa beyond aid, the way we look at issues has got to change. We need to look inward. We need to think about ourselves. Nigeria is the 6th largest producer of oil in the world. but Nigeria does not decide the price of its oil.
Yeah.
These are all fundamental issues, and these are questions that we need to ask. You know, until we begin to look inward and ask the right questions and say, how do we become better? How do we make more? How do we negotiate our worth? We will not be able to achieve an Africa without aid. We will try, but we'll hit a brick wall at some point.
Right. Going down history, there are lots of people who fought for the emancipation of Africa's freedom, like the Nelson Mandelas, those who are not with us anymore. But we are fortunate that in our era, we have few men like yourself who are trying to put Africa on that level where the young ones can also follow suit. Typically of one such person is Apostle Kojosafo, who is into car manufacturing and also farming. Now he has an agenda of coming up with a very large organic farm where he believes Africans can eat from and live healthy and grow as long as Africans should live. But unfortunately, some of these things need support from all of us.
Yes.
Are we waiting till he's no more? Then we mention him in history and say there was a man who lived like that in the past. What do you think we should do collectively as a people to support such people as yourself who are into this agenda?
You know, every time I think about, I like to call him Kantanka. You know, I mean, I can actually sit here and spend the next 1 hour talking about him. Okay. He's a man that a lot of us are proud of. I don't know if Ghanaians are as proud of him as we are in other parts of Africa, even like in Nigeria, you know, because of the path that he has chosen and the sacrifice that he's had to make, you know, not just to put Ghana on the map, but to also project a certain image and a certain identity to show that the African is actually capable of managing his own affairs. And he has chosen the path of technology to make this happen, you know. It is very, very possible that he can even go much further, okay, when we are able to identify more effectively with him, okay? But we need to also embrace the reality of the fact that the kind of system that we run is the kind of system that kind of works against people like Kantanka. Yeah. That's how capitalism is. Wow. You know, it's always the pursuit of profit, and some of the times it doesn't matter who you bring down, okay, in order to achieve that. But he's been on the path. He's kept pushing and all of that. And one of the things I would like to do, you know, at this point is to, number one, encourage him. He's been doing it for over 30 years. You know, he hasn't stopped. And so to encourage him to keep doing it and to also help us raise men that will continue in the path. It takes a while before it catches fire. But the other thing is for all of us to identify with a path like that. It brings us back to the issue of consciousness. Why shouldn't I eat organic food when I know that GMO is killing me? Oh. You see? But the mentality, the consciousness, okay, tells you, I mean, it's properly packaged, so why don't you pick it up? But that's what's killing you, okay? The other one is far better. Why aren't we buying it? Why aren't we buying our own rice? Why aren't we buying our own crops? Why aren't we buying our own farm produce? Okay? It's all about the consciousness. But I tell you that we are growing. Okay, if it was just about 20 conscious people before, we now have 20 million conscious people. And so we're going to come to a point, and I pray that it's going to be in the near future, okay, where even people will come to him and say, you know what, we want to invest in what you're doing. I am hoping that very soon Kantanka will be quoted on the stock exchange, you know, or in the stock market, sorry. And we'll come to a point where we all want to have shares in what he's doing in order to grow the business.
Wow. Thank you very much, Ogo. I can't just have enough of you because as we are talking, a lot of things are running through my head, but unfortunately we have to bring the show to a halt to make way for other things as well. He will still come back anyway because we cannot do African New Time without Ogo as our backbone or our spine. Wow. So we'll call on you anytime, and I believe you'll be available to give us audience. And thank you so much for the work you're doing. It's a one-man agenda, but I believe you are touching lives, you know. So accept that fact, redefine certain rules for your own self, and believe in yourself. And I believe Africa will be the America that we all want to go to. Thank you so much again for making time with us on African New Time. My name is Nana Uswansa. A big thank you again to the production crew for putting this together. See you same time next week. Peace.